But no visitor made more headlines than the actress Jane Fonda. During 2 weeks in the summer of 1972, she broadcast at least 10 times over Radio Hanoi, denouncing American POWs for having committed war crimes, urging the North Vietnamese to hold out against American imperialism. Many Americans would never forgive her for what she did and said.
According to international law, these men are war criminals. That's according to law, according to the Nuremberg principles, according to the Geneva Accord and others. They should be tried in front of a court and probably executed.
It is not at all common for Hollywood to send out what they believe to be their best and brightest to virtue signal. However, we are living in a time where virtue signaling is pretty often. I mean, it happens all the time. All you got to do is just open up Twitter and you see a bunch of Hollywood types who, quite frankly, have no self-awareness, run their mouth about the issues of the day, and they just end up looking like a bunch of loons. And if you say something about that, they think you're actually canceling them. However, it tends to be a bit of an issue when you decide to virtue signal on something you have no actual true knowledge about. Now, this video right here is about why it is that vets, including vets like myself, have utter disdain for Hanoi Jane, and why it is that we call her Hanoi Jane. Well, the answers to this question are, let's just say, pretty easy to decipher when you actually look at the actual things that she did, especially during the Vietnam War. Now, guys, before we get started, this video is not a video that is designed to be pro-Vietnam War or anti-Vietnam War. This right here is a video designed to show you exactly how stupid Hollywood can be, and I'm using the actions of Hanoi Jane. I will be giving you guys a few more examples of Hollywood being completely stupid when it comes to the topic that involves anything veteran-related or combat. However, obviously, Hanoi Jane will be the main focus of this video, and I'll also give you guys a couple of other stories from history of people taking the wrong route, but yet then somehow or another trying to actually redeem themselves. However, I need you to know now, and if you're somebody who out there who thinks I'm just going to bash Hanoi Jane, you're 100% correct. This woman right here is completely irredeemable, and with that right there being said, let's go ahead and daughter of actor Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda, by the way, had played a few roles in film history that, quite frankly, were pretty well iconic. He's definitely remembered for his role in Midway. He is definitely remembered for other roles throughout Hollywood. 12 Angry Men, of course, you know, and pretty well liked, pretty popular actor. So his daughter, who went to Paris in 1954, studied art for about 6 months, came back home, became a bit of a star, starred in the film Barbarella, starred in a few other films. And you guys kind of pick up on the fact that maybe there might have been a little bit of nepotism here. I mean, I will give Hanoi Jane some credit. She was very, very much a looker. But of course, if you pay very close to the footage from Vietnam or North Vietnam itself, and you see the old film footage, you probably think to yourself, wow, this woman right here obviously needs a lot of makeup. She's not exactly what we call a natural beauty. But here's the deal, though. People still viewed her that way, and people at the time were getting a pretty negative view of the Vietnam War. Now, like I said before, this video right here is not designed to be pro-war or anti-war. It's just designed to explain to you why it is that veterans, for the most part, refer to her as Hanoi Jane and absolutely cannot stand the sight of her, have absolute full disdain. Me personally, my disdain is more along the lines of I just have no sympathy or any feeling towards this woman at all. This video right here is to discuss why it is that veterans like myself, and especially Vietnam veterans, especially those who were coming back home from a war that was not popular, and they were being greeted by a bunch of people who did not have any idea of what was actually going on, that right there being the hippie protesters, which I personally think that this little stunt that she pulled was actually an extension of that, when the whole hippie movement as a whole was pretty much dead and buried going into this time frame. But the fact of the matter is this here. Whatever you may think of the war, please do us all a favor, and please leave the troops alone. Don't attack the troops. We're just simply following orders. We're doing this, by the way, for you, whether you like it or not. We're laying our lives on the line. We are putting our lives down for your right to be a complete, total dumbass. And like I said before, you may have some very negative feelings towards the Vietnam War, but please do us all a favor and leave the troops out of it. Back to the war itself. The American public was getting a shaping of the war from people like, say, Walter Cronkite at 6 o'clock at night. Of course, in those days, most televisions only had 3 channels. And, of course, when you're watching Cronkite and he's basically telling you the war is unwinnable, when in reality, we had just won Hue City. We had just won Khe Sanh in 1968. The war was not exactly going as negative as someone like Cronkite would lead you to believe. Nixon came in office in 1969, and one of the very first things he decided to do was focus the war not so much on North Vietnam itself, but on the surrounding territories that were producing the VC enemies that our troops were fighting. These areas, of course, included Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand. Now, this video is obviously not designed to be a full Vietnam piece, but I need to give you guys a little bit of background here. We were bombing the literal hell out of these people, and we were being quite successful, to tell you the truth. Nixon was actually saving lives at that time, and he was trying to reduce the overall military force, the military presence in that region. So when you hear someone like Jane Fonda say something like this here,
These men are war criminals. That's according to law, according to the Nuremberg principles, according to the Geneva Accord and others. They should be tried in front of a court and probably executed for...
Just know right off the bat that she's talking like a crazy person, and the American media was not exactly presenting an accurate portrayal of what was really going on. As I opened this video, I told you guys that there were many examples of Hollywood actors and Hollywood types being complete total morons. I'm showing you guys some tweets from Seth Rogen, but then you get these, and this, by the way, was from about Chris Kyle, an American sniper. These people oftentimes love to talk out of their ass. But one of the best examples of this is Michael Moore.
Are cowards. It's not coming from me, it's coming from Michael Moore. He does, and apparently he's not alone. The documentary filmmaker went on Twitter last night and bashed the new Oscar-nominated Bradley Cooper feature American Sniper, a biopic about Chris Kyle, a former Navy SEAL and sharpshooter. One of Moore's tweets read, quote, "My uncle was killed by a sniper in World War II. We were taught snipers were cowards. We'll shoot you in the back. Snipers aren't heroes. They're invaders."
And in a 20-year Marine career, Gunnery Sergeant Jeff Crenshaw should know. He was a Marine Corps sniper, carried the gun and the burdens that came with it in both Iraq and Afghanistan. He pulled the trigger, and just like Chris Kyle, brought some of those same burdens home.
I mean, it's just, it changes you.
Your call.
As for the movie American Sniper, he calls it the most realistic thing he's seen since the battlefield.
It's not glorifying it in any ways. Again, it shows how awful war is and how war is meant to be a last resort.
But movie maker Michael Moore tweeted that snipers are cowards. That's who he says killed an uncle of his in World War II.
Anybody who says that's an idiot. Will we shoot a target in the back? You know, if that's all we've got, you bet. Especially if he's trying to kill, one of the good guys. You know, call that cowardly. I call that saving.
Me being an Iraq war veteran and on my way to do my first deployment, which was actually that year I would go. My first deployment would be in September of 2004. We thought of guys like Michael Moore like they were absolutely nothing. Almost like what that Marine sniper said, the man is obviously an idiot. And if you pay very close attention, I'm giving you guys the B-roll footage one more time, you see that there are some people in the crowd that are not exactly okay with this. As I have said before on multiple occasions, on my main channel, John Claymore, the vast majority of actors in reality are just spokesmen. They toe the line, so that way they keep their job. A recent example, of course, occurred with Charles Barkley, basically saying that everybody who was, everybody who was boycotting Bud Light was a bit of an idiot on the side of being anti-America, anti the military and all that stuff there. Michael Moore is just another extremely bad example. He's just one of the more open, fat leftoids that comes out and tells you who he is. But I remember that particular speech from that particular Oscars that, it did not exactly go over well, even with the crowd, who I personally think Hollywood was trying to. It's very possible that Hollywood was trying to not let the mask slip. Maybe they were trying to cover it up. But then again, at the same time, though, at that time, they at least understood that they had people from both sides of the aisle watching, and they probably did not want to alienate those, because there were even some who may vote Democrat who had their kids serving in the military at that time. They didn't like the idea of someone like Michael Moore running his mouth, basically trashing Bush at that time. Even though they may not have liked it, they took it as a slight against the men and women in the military at that time, which is pretty much something that many people felt about Jane Fonda. She wasn't really taking a slight at the president. She was really, in a lot of ways, taking a slight at the troops, which, and I can tell you right now, I can honestly empathize with them. Ask any parent who's ever had to send a child to war, and they will tell you flat out they do not like the country being protested by a bunch of anti-war protesters, or anybody like in Jane Fonda's case, who was actively rooting for the NVA and the enemy that we were fighting. Now back to Hanoi Jane. Some of this I got from another YouTuber named Ward Carroll, who does a lot of veteran stories, and I have already told you guys that I'm going to be angling this channel more in that direction in overall military history and film reviews, but I'm going to be leaving that video in the description box for you guys. It's a very good video. But there are other things that Hanoi Jane was doing. For example, she called our troops, the men in uniform, she called them all war criminals. I hate to tell you this, and I understand that you may hear some stories from time to time, and I'm telling this right here to the vast majority of the left-wingers out there who love to protest wars and love to run their mouth at the troops and veterans. I think you need to think before you decide to call us all a bunch of war criminals. The vast majority of us are just simply doing what the hell our country asks us to do, and it's always an honorable thing when you join the military. Of course, most of these people would never actually do this. These are the same people, by the way, who scream and holler for reparations for slavery, which, by the way, was something that ended back in 1865. Yet these idiots never call out what happens in Africa and other nations around the world. And yet they're also at the same time not willing to actually move to those places, even though they claim that those places are better than us. Very, very dumb thinking out of these people. I mean, just figure out, throw that out there. She went on NVA radio, and she basically called 10 separate times. She called for U.S. personnel to get killed. She called for the bombing to end, and then she had this very, very smug attitude about her, which when she got back home, she figured that she would say this here, and she thought that maybe people would I don't know, maybe forgive her for the whole incident.
And I'm speaking particularly to U.S. citizens who are stationed by the aircraft carriers in the Gulf of Tonkin, in the 7th Fleet, in the Anglican Corps in the south of Vietnam. It is very far away, perhaps, and removed from the country that will be ordered to shoot shells at and bomb. And the use of these bombs, or the condoning the use of these bombs, makes one a war criminal. The ones that are ordering you to use these weapons are war criminals, according to international law. In the past, in Germany and in Japan, men who were guilty of this kind of crime were tried and executed.
This, by the way, was not the only broadcast that Hanoi Jane did while she was over there on her tour.
Fonda and Hanoi, and I'm speaking to the men in the cockpits of the cabins, in the business cities, your S-boys, all of you who are still here fighting the war, all of you, in your heart of hearts, know the lies. You know the cheating on the body count, the falsified body reports, and the number of planes that are shot down, and what your targets really are. Knowing who is doing the lying, should we then allow these same people and same liars to decide for you who your enemy is? Shouldn't we then, shouldn't we all, examine the reasons that have been given to us to justify the murder that you are being paid to commit? If they told you the truth, you wouldn't fight, you wouldn't kill, so you were not born and brought up by your mothers to be killed. So you've been...
Honor recipient Colonel Bud Day recounted how it felt to those in captivity to hear Jane Fonda's words.
To hear that siren call that you know is so absolutely rotten and wrong, it was terrible. I was very frightened that I was going to get one of my people were going to get killed from doing something really dumb just out of anger.
It should also be noted that the POWs were treated even more harshly by their captors in the wake of Jane Fonda's visit, presumably because they were emboldened by her attitude.
Not so much what Hanoi Jane did that makes her hated. It's really the hypocrisy. That is what makes Hanoi Jane so hated. Now, Jane, of course, after the Vietnam War, she would eventually go on to have, I guess you could say, somewhat of a decent life. She didn't really need anything, but of course she's always going to be hated for good reason. The same woman would do small roles, whatever, like she starred in a film with Robert Redford and then All the President's Men, where they gave her an Academy Award, and nobody's ever really looked up when it comes to Jane Fonda. We typically tend to look down on her, which, by the way, she deserves to be looked down upon. Then she decided she wanted to get married to Ted Turner somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s. Live off of him, coax off him for a while. And then while being married to him, she suddenly decides to divorce him and claim that she suddenly found Jesus. The same exact way that she claimed that she felt bad for the U.S. personnel and that it was actually a human tragedy shortly after calling for U.S. personnel in the region to be killed, to be executed, and to be tried as war criminals. You guys kind of pick up on a pattern? So when Jane Fonda makes a statement like this...
Speaking out against the crimes that are being committed in our name by Nixon and by the Pentagon, the people who are struggling to reestablish in America the qualities that we started out with. It is these people who are the real patriots. I lived in France for 7 years. And it was Vietnam, and it was the war in Vietnam who forced me to ask myself certain questions about America. And I went back to the United States because I wanted to fight there, in my country, because I care about my country. And I think that I shed many tears in Vietnam. I cried every day in Vietnam. It was never for the Vietnamese. It's impossible to cry for the Vietnamese. They sing, they dance, they create. Well, I'll talk about that in a second. I didn't cry for the Vietnamese, I cried for the Americans. Because although the bombs are falling on Vietnam, it's an American tragedy. The tragedy is ours, and it's going to take the American people many, many years to undo the damage and to wipe off.
Prisoners of war, Americans who were suffering, Americans who had to go through the conditions similar to that of what would be the Hanoi Hilton. Yes, men who actually laid their lives on the line. Some of these, of course, a good portion of them were actually draftees. Plucked. Don't worry, we'll talk about drafting here in a second, because there is a character that we do need to talk about who would later on try to redeem himself of this. And then there would be a second character that we will talk about who, for whatever reason, people tend to forget about his history of draft dodging. But don't worry, we'll get to these two individuals in a second. You don't go overseas and you don't go to a war zone, or you don't go to an area that had been bombed by us and then turn right back around and say that we should be held accountable, and say that the men that are currently living in these conditions, practically suffering, that they basically need to die or go in front of a court. War is hell. We all know this. War obviously sucks, especially the Vietnam War, and I can't think of anything worse in America's history or a true American tragedy than the way Vietnam veterans were treated when they got back home. You could say this because obviously people think that because the Vietnam War did not end as a W for the United States, that Vietnam veterans should be treated any differently. I want to go ahead and let you guys in on a little secret. The Vietnam veteran had a 70 to 75% fireback rate, meaning that when Vietnam veterans were shot at, they typically tend to shoot back. This right here, of course, is also in concordance with some very, very works that Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman did. Also, there's the Marshall study that discussed many issues like this. And Vietnam veterans, in reality, at that point in time, were the best trained soldiers, the best trained Marines that we ever had. Since then, the military went through a phase where it actually got a little bit better in its training. But then again, I think now it's kind of regressed, especially with the whole woke SJW stuff that's going on in the military with pronouns and crap like that. But the Vietnam veteran was, for the most part, the best trained troop that we had ever produced, ever in history. And I believe that Vietnam veteran is a true badass, especially given the fact that not only did they fight an opponent, and that right there being the Viet Cong, the NVA, someone that quite frankly they could not see. I can actually relate to Vietnam veterans because in Iraq and Afghanistan, oftentimes the enemy did not wear a uniform, so therefore a lot of times they were not discernible, meaning that you quite frankly could not see them or tell them apart from the rest of the crowd. You're talking about traps, punji stakes, you're talking about anything and everything, any cheap tactic. And I can already hear somebody saying, well, they were fighting over their land. And I would obviously give them credit. Obviously, if I was being invaded or my nation was being invaded, obviously, I would use every cheap, dirty, grimy tactic in the book. But there's a such thing called chivalry. There's a such thing called respect, especially for those coming off the plane. You see, these same people would say that it was an American tragedy that our veterans had to go through this, especially when they got back home. But yet the people saying it was a tragedy were also the same people throwing fecal matter and calling them baby killers. I just figured I'd throw that out. They deserve to have somebody call for their death or physically go over to the nation that we are fighting and go on their radio telecast on 10 separate occasions and basically preach the propaganda line. Of course, this also includes people like John Kerry, who has also been a little bit of a, well, I'm not really going to get John Kerry will be his own video. But here's the thing about Ali, and I will say this about Ali, and it wasn't until I came across this video here from Steven Crowder. Now, I will not be playing the full video for you. I won't be playing the video at all. As a matter of fact, I'll once again leave it in the description box. Crowder made a lot of very interesting observations post-Ali, post that entire debacle. Ali, for the most part, did eventually feel bad about the situation, and while he may not have fully redeemed himself, at least he would find a way to at least try to do so. Which leads me to the next person, Ted Nugent. People oftentimes forget, and me obviously being somebody on the conservative side of politics, you'd think maybe we like Ted, and for a long time I did like Ted. Then I remembered this. By the way, it is also believed that due to her rhetoric that the POWs were treated a lot worse. That right there being American POWs that were treated a lot worse due to her actual rhetoric. You see, sometimes somebody when they're in charge, like say what the NVA would be in this case, if they see that somebody from the other side is actually on their side, they will tend to not only treat the people that they're torturing a lot worse, they'll typically tend to kind of comment, laugh, make fun of them in the process. I mean, it's bad enough that you're getting your butt kicked. The last thing you would want is somebody talking to you while they did it. Then there is this photo here of which she tried to explain away in her 2005 autobiography. Photo, of course, which she would write about in her 2005 autobiography, she would basically try to take back. She said that she felt she was being set up, but yet she also didn't blame the NVA, but yet now the 2 minutes actually haunt her for the rest of her life. Okay, so you felt you were set up, then you said you don't blame them for setting you up, then now it's haunting you for the rest of your life. You see, this right here is commonly the photo that many people kind of put towards her as saying that this right here is why we call her Hanoi Jane. This is where she got the moniker. And obviously it's pretty sick, it's pretty twisted. And as I have said before, I mean, I think that what Hanoi Jane was doing was she's trying to virtue signal to people back home. Of course, it fell on deaf ears because most normal, sane, rational people, especially that silent majority that former President Nixon talked about, they weren't exactly down for this. None of these people may have been against the war, but they had sons or daughters, or actually, for the most part, they had sons fighting in the war. So they obviously did not like somebody going over there and practically stabbing America in the back at that time, regardless of what their political leanings were. I mean, you got a cousin, you got a brother that's serving, and then and you may be against the war, but yet you hear this woman do this. You see this woman go on radio broadcast and basically take a great big giant dump on the American soldiers, and especially those who are actually locked up in POW camps. It's probably going to change your mind about a lot of people. That's why there's also some good old-fashioned blue dog Dems out there and libs who also do not like Hanoi Jane either, and quite frankly, I don't blame them. As I have said, I personally think this woman deserves all the crapping that she gets. Anytime somebody brings up Hanoi Jane, I absolutely laugh and I say, go right ahead, go in on her. Anytime she goes to a restaurant and people say, we're not going to give you service because of the way you did our boys, I quite frankly don't blame them. She deserves all the grief. She deserves every bit of the grief that she gets. Just know it's because she is a lying hypocrite. And quite frankly, not only is she a lying hypocrite, but obviously somebody who loves to use certain things like, say, her sudden found Christianity as some form of shield from the things that she has said. And I know what you're saying. You're engaging in cancel culture. I hate to tell you this, but there's a difference between cancel culture and accountability. This right here would be absolute accountability. And Jane Fonda, quite frankly, has never really recovered publicly since what happened in North Vietnam. And quite frankly, that right there is the way it should stay. Hanoi Jane proved herself to not only be a lying hypocrite, but an extremely bad person altogether. And that is the real reason why it is that vets actually cannot stand, hate, and have a total, utter disdain for this woman. Now, before I end this video, I want to give you guys my personal thoughts on this, on something. All right. If you are anti-war, if you are anti the war that we are fighting, that is okay. Okay, you have your right to feel the way you do. Okay, it's just the way that it is. Some men, they volunteer. I volunteered to go. Okay, some men volunteer, some men are drafted. My philosophy is this here. Even if you are anti-war, if you receive a draft card, you still need to go. I'll put it this way here. If I had been alive in the 1960s, a teenager, or maybe even in my early 20s, and I was anti the Vietnam War and I received a draft card, I would still go. And the reason why is because your country, quite frankly, is calling you. Which is really going to be funny to see when all these left-wing agitators and all these people who spent time burning down the nation's cities during 2020, during the George Floyd riots, it's really going to be hilarious to see if World War III officially breaks out, how they're going to respond to their selective service, because the vast majority of them have to register for it. It's really going to be hilarious to see how they feel after they've actually been drafted. I just figured I would throw that out there. Guys, Gear Issue 33. If you like this content, please hit the like button, subscribe, share the video. This video will be out on Wednesday afternoon. On Friday or Thursday, the trailer for the project on Zulu will be out, and hopefully that review will be out on Sunday, barring any of the problems that I sustained yesterday. I'll leave this video in the comments section to kind of explain to you guys what exactly happened to that review. If you guys like this content, please hit the like button, subscribe, share the video, sound off in the comments section. If you feel like I've earned your subscription, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. It's a new direction that we're going into. Please leave a comment. I would love to get your thoughts, and I will see you guys later.